Do I have a volunteer to read our goal for today? Clay, go for it.
To know that in order to read people in life and in stories, readers notice when a person does or say something that stands out.
Thank you, sir. So we're trying to pay attention to what do they normally act like and when do they do or when do they say something that changes that pattern or stands out. And so going back to the Tiger Rising, we need to think about how is the character acting now and what patterns have we seen in the way the character acts normally, right? And then does this new action fit with that old pattern or does this new action disrupt that pattern that we've already noticed about our character? Okay, so especially when you're reading a chapter book, the character usually starts out a certain way, and then there's some kind of outside source that enters into the book, and it changes the way that character acts. It changes their personality traits and those kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that with Rob. All right, so I'm going to read an example from early in the story that is an example of Rob's, what we would probably say is Rob's normal behavior, right? So we're going to start on page 5. It's on page 5 and 6. So it says, "Look ye here," said Norton Threemonger as soon as Rob stepped onto the school bus. "It's the Kentucky Star. How's it feel to be a star?" Norton stood in the center of the aisle, blocking Rob's path. Rob shrugged. "Oh, he don't know," Norton called to his brother. "Hey, Billy, he don't know what it's like to be a star." Rob slipped past Norton, and he walked all the way to the back of the bus and sat down in the very last seat. "Hey," said Billy Threemonger, "you know what? This ain't Kentucky. This is Florida." He followed Rob and sat down next to him. He pushed his face so close that Rob could smell his breath. It was bad breath. "I smell metallic and rotten." It smelled metallic and rotten. "You ain't a Kentucky Star," Billy said. His eyes were glowing underneath the brim of his John Deere cap. "And you sure ain't a star here in Florida. You ain't a star nowhere." "Okay," said Rob. Billy shoved him hard, and then Norton came swaggering back and leaned over Billy and grabbed hold of Rob's hair with one hand, and with the other hand grounded his knuckles into Rob's scalp. Rob sat there and took it. If he fought back, it lasted longer. If he didn't fight back, sometimes they would get bored and left him alone. They were the only 3 kids on the bus until they got into town, and Mr. Nelson, the driver, pretended like he didn't know what was going on. He drove staring straight ahead, whistling songs that he didn't have any melody. Rob was on his own, and he knew it. "He's got the creeping crud all over him," said Billy. He pointed at Rob's legs. "Look," he said. "Norton, ain't it gross?" "Uh-huh," said Norton. He was concentrating on grinding his knuckles into Rob's head, and it hurt, but Rob didn't cry. He never cried. So I'm going to stop there with the reading, and I want us to think for a second about how does Rob act, right? I know it's probably easy to focus on Billy and Norton in this scene because they're the ones doing most of the talking, but they're not really the characters we're concerned about in the story, right? So we're going to stop and think about how is Rob acting in the scene? We'll start with that question. So how is Rob acting? Anybody? Go ahead, Asil. Thank you for raising your hand.
He's acting, well, he's not really doing anything in the scene.
Yeah, he's just kind of letting it happen, right? He doesn't stand up for himself. He's not really fighting back or telling them to stop, right? And do we see it? I know we're really early into the book, right? So it may be hard to say like what patterns have we seen in the way the character acts. But the author's showing us really early with the pattern already on the bus, right? We have step 1. The boys walk on and call him, say he's like not a star, and they're yelling at him. He just says, shrugs his shoulders and walks past them. Then they start actually touching him and pushing him and bullying him, and he just says, okay, and he takes it. Then they kind of like continue to do it, and it just says he doesn't cry. He never cries, right? So he just kind of like lets it all happen. Do we see him doing that more as the story goes on? Do we see Rob just being passive more as the story goes on? Can anybody think of some other examples that we've read in the story where something happens and Rob just lets it kind of happen as a pattern of his behavior? Ania, go ahead. Thanks for raising your hand.
When Sustain touches his leg.
Yeah, so when Go ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
he just like he wants to say something, but he just doesn't. He's just wondering. He's just thinking to himself like, why is she touching me? She said she wasn't my friend.
Yeah. So when he's, thank you. That's a great example. So when he's on the bus going home later and Sistine kind of is like, wants to get sick and not go to school, she touches the rash on his leg. And he doesn't say anything like, hey, what are you doing or anything like that. He just kind of sits there and lets it happen. Again, he's passive and just kind of letting things happen again. Clay, go ahead. Is there any other examples where he just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything?
One example is after he saves her, it was in the lunchroom, I'm thinking, or in school.
Okay. Is that an example of his normal pattern of behavior, or is that something that doesn't fit?
His normal pattern of behavior, because when I forgot her name.
Sistine. I think you're starting to freeze, so I'm going to go ahead and talk, and if you come back, we'll let you kind of share with us a little bit more. So yeah, another example that we may not remember because it doesn't really stick out is when Rob goes to the principal's office, right? And the principal tells him that he's got that rash, so he's going to have to go home. And Rob doesn't really stand up and say like, yeah, it's not contagious. This is what the doctor said. He just lets it go because he wants to go home, right? So we see this pattern of Rob just kind of really letting things happen, not really doing much and saying much, and keeping his emotions and all that locked inside and being very passive. Now, we have a couple actions that we've read now in the story that disrupt that pattern, or they don't fit. Can anybody think of something that disrupts that pattern or doesn't fit in with Rob's normal passive behavior? Somebody I haven't heard from yet. So if you've been listening to the story, we should know some examples of things Rob does that they don't fit in with the normal. Go ahead, Corbin. Thank you.
When he saved Sistine.
Yeah, so when Sistine, go ahead, keep going.
He ran away.
Yeah.
So the people who were picking on her would chase him.
Yeah, so when all the bullies are picking on Sistine, Rob, who normally is super quiet and lets things happen, stands up and yells, like, hey, leave her alone, and then has the bullies chase after him to kind of help Sistine out. So he's breaking the pattern. He also, I don't know if you didn't get a chance to listen to chapter 11 yesterday with us, he also tells Sistine about the tiger, right? And so we've seen him, there's been 2 cases now where he's broken his normal pattern of behavior of keeping to himself and kind of avoiding contact with people and kind of being quiet. What has caused those 2 disruptions in his normal pattern of behavior? Because it's been kind of the same thing that's caused it both times. What is it? You can just unmute yourself and say it if you want to.
The tiger.
The tiger's not the one causing him to break his pattern. He's interested in the tiger.
People that bully her.
Sistine.
Yeah, I've heard a couple. All right, go ahead and mute yourselves again. I've heard a couple people say it now. Sistine, right? Sistine is the one who is causing him to act differently, and he doesn't really know why. But if we were charting his normal behavior and we put all of his normal behaviors and their causes on one chart, and then we moved it over to the other side, right? They would kind of fit that description. So we're going to do this together now. So before that, we're going to say Rob's actions and words and talk about why they're important. So his actions and thinking words, we said over here on one side is lets the 3 mongers pick on him repeatedly. Doesn't speak up to the principal. And do you guys remember too that lets a student trip him on his way out of the room? So what does that make me think? That makes me think Rob is okay with what's happening. because, sorry. It happens more than once and he doesn't say anything to change it. This is his pattern of behavior, right? So that's what his normal stuff is. Go ahead, sis, or I see your hand up. I'm gonna call you Sistine. Go ahead.
Okay, I think that I don't think he's okay with it, but I think he's just doing that because he already got used to it and it's normal for him.
That's a good thought. It's a great thought, and you could write that down about your type of characters if you want to. That's an excellent thought. And then over here on the new one, right? Actions. I'm going to say that he stands up for Sistine when she is getting bullied. And I'm going to say that I'm going to move this up a little bit. I'm also going to say that he tells Sistine about the tiger. And so then the so what, this makes sense to me, or what this makes me think, is Sistine, for some reason, hang on, sorry, the camera docks to places I gotta move it around all the time. Now it's not letting me move it, so lovely. There we go. Sistine, for some reason, causes Rob to act differently. And I'm going to even put, I think they may end up being friends. Right? So that's my back and forth about Rob as a character. That's the information we've noticed, and that's what it makes me think. So we're going to do one together now with Sistine. All right? So I'm going to read a short part of chapter 3 now about Sistine, and we're really going to look at her and her normal pattern of behavior and see if there's anything she does that stands out, okay? So here we go. Nobody wore pink lacy dresses to school. Nobody. Rob knew that. He held his breath as he watched the girl walk down the aisle of the bus. Here was somebody even stranger than he was. He was sure. Hey, Norton called. This is a school bus. I know it, the girl said. Her voice was gravelly and deep, and the words sounded clipped and strange in the way she talked, like she was stamping each one of them out with a cookie cutter. You're all dressed up to go to a party, Billy said. This ain't a party bus. Then he elbowed his brother in the ribs. Are you asking why? Sorry. My bad. Let's miss a spot. He elbowed his brother in the ribs. Ha, Norton laughed, and then he gave Rob a friendly thud on his head. The girl stood in the center of the aisle, swaying with the movement of the bus, and she stared at them. It's not my fault you don't have good clothes, she said finally. Then she sat down and put her back towards the boys. So just based on what we see about Sistine already, what could we say? Her action, thinking, and words. I'm going to put Sistine tells the boys it's not her fault they don't have good clothes. Or sorry, I think she says nice clothes. So who can share this? What does that make us kind of think about Sistine as a character? What does that tell us about her? What does that make us think about Sistine as a character? She says, it's not my fault you don't have nice clothes when they start picking on her. Anybody? Ania, go for it.
This makes me think that Sistine is just like looking at them and saying, "Oh, it's not my fault that you don't have nice clothes." Like she's standing up for herself, and she's telling the boys it's not her fault that they don't have nice clothes like her.
I'm gonna say she's telling the boys off, right? She's like, "Hey, I don't have time for you." Right? She's standing up for herself. We also see her later as we keep reading. Sistine is fighting bullies outside the cafeteria, right? That's when Rob yells out at her. So we can kind of conclude that Again, she stands up for herself, right? And then if you guys remember in the text, she also tells her classmates that people in the South are ignorant. Now I want you to think about that and think about what that tells us about Sistine, right? What's that tell us about Sistine? That she gets up in the front of her classroom where all these people are from the South, and she says to them, people in the South are ignorant. What does that tell us about her as a character? That she's willing to get up in front of everybody in her class and say, I hate the South, I hate it here, I'm going back home to Philadelphia, and people in the South are ignorant. Somebody besides Ania, what does that tell us? Y'all cannot just sit here silent every single day. Other people are going to have to talk. Michael, thank you.
I think it means that she doesn't like people from the South because the bullies might be people from the South, and that might makes her that she don't like people from the South because they bully her.
Yeah, I'm also going to go a little bit further than that too, because she could get bullied by people not from the South. But I'm just going to say in general, Sistine probably doesn't like people very much, right? And she really doesn't care what people think. I want you to think about if you were brand new in a classroom, would you get up on the first day and walk up in front of everybody and basically tell them that you think they're all ignorant? Or would you maybe think like, okay, I'm not going to get up and say that because I don't know what these people yet, and I don't want them to think badly of me. She does not care, right? She's up there in front of everybody, and she said she does not care. And so we haven't really seen yet too much development in things outside of that norm for her, right? That's what we have normalized as Sistine's behavior. Even though she's kind of starting to talk to Rob, she still kind of seems like rude, disrespectful. He shows up they live at a hotel, and she's like, you live in a hotel, right? So he's very different from her, and she's made him act differently. We haven't seen Rob make Sistine act differently yet. So that's something we're going to kind of want to pay close attention to. So your job when you go out today in small group or before you get to small group is to go back and reread your idea and look for evidence. It's important to remember to find evidence for your idea. So if you're saying my character's outgoing, what in the story makes you say that? What have they said? What have they done? Notice today when we did these with Sistine and Rob, we found specific examples of what they have said and what they have done in the story, and then said, this is what that makes me think about that character. So you're looking for going back into your text. You're actually not going to read anything new today. You're going to reread some of the parts you've already read, okay? So I'm giving you permission not to read new pages today, but go back and look at what have you already read and say, okay, this is what I noticed the character said and did. This is what it tells me about the character, right? I'll look Rob specifically. We said that he lets them pick on him repeatedly. He walks, or he doesn't say anything to the principal. He doesn't say anything when people trip him, right? Those are the actions and thinking, and then we conclude that he's okay with those things happening. I've got a couple student examples of charts you could do here. I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger on my screen really quick, because your job is to go back to things you've noticed earlier in the story and develop those ideas further, right? And you're going to write about how your character's actions fit with your ideas about them and what you think, and then post your work on Canvas like you have been. So this is a story someone did called Granny Torelli Makes Soup. But I'm going to notice they put like actions and thinking words. And so what? So then they put, here's an action. Carmelita always tells Rosie to help Bailey, and Rosie always does. And then I said, this makes me think that Rosie is very protective over Bailey, right? Because Rosie always helps Bailey when she asks it. Then notice they're putting page numbers. This says Rosie is infuriated by Bailey for saying something, but she can't take her mind off the fight. This makes me think that Rosie is the type of character that cannot forget a grudge or let something go. So you're looking at what is the character saying and doing, and what does that tell you about the character, right? So for example, I know Michael's been doing a lot of work in the boy that the boy who learned to cook, right? And the boy's starting a restaurant. Well, when the boy's restaurant gets really busy, he starts to kind of panic and freak out, right? So he may say, like, on this page, the boy starts to get worried when a lot of people are in line at his restaurant. So what does that mean? It tells us that that character probably doesn't handle stressful situations very well, or he's worried that the people, they're not going to be able to serve the food enough. Okay, so you're going back. What does the character say and do? I'm going to repeat it one more time. What does the character say and do? And what does that tell you about the character as a person? All right, that's your job today. 9-10 reading groups. We're going to work on you finding some of those statements and being able to go back and find evidence. Later groups, I want you to try to come to the meeting with some of that already written down. So we're not going, hey, here's some time to work on it, but we're going to actually be able to sit and talk about it when you get here today, because you're going to have 40 minutes to work on this. 9-10 groups. We will see you at 9:10. It is 9:01. That means you have 9 minutes to kind of collect your thoughts. Maybe look back at what you have in your notes before. So when you come back together, we can kind of use those to build off of things. All right. I will see y'all in about 10 minutes.